They closed a store that was making money, not because the burgers stopped selling, not because the customers stopped coming. They closed it because gunshots were going through the walls. That was In-Out Burger in Oakland, California. And it was the first store they'd ever permanently closed in 77 years of business. Then, a year later, the billionaire owner of the whole chain sat down for a podcast interview and said California is no longer okay for raising a family or running a business, and she's packing up and leaving. The media went absolutely feral. Headlines everywhere screamed that In-Out was abandoning California forever. Politicians scrambled, the internet exploded, and here's the thing. Almost nobody is telling you. Most of those headlines were factually wrong. And the truth is actually more interesting than the fiction. So why should you care, sitting here in Australia, about a burger chain drama playing out 13,000 kilometers away? Because this isn't really about burgers. It's about a pattern that's already showing up right here at home, in the decisions businesses and wealthy people are making about where to live, where to invest, and where to stay. We've watched Victoria introduce new land taxes and a windfall gains tax that sent property developers reaching for the phone to call their mates in Brisbane. We've watched Sydney founders quietly mention they're considering relocating to the Gold Coast or Perth. We're watching talent and capital start to shift slowly, then, all at once. California's is running the same experiment, but at 10 times the scale and 10 years further down the track. Which means if you want to know what's coming here, pay attention to what's happening there. The pattern is identical, only the accents are different. Let's go back to 1948, Baldwin Park, California. A bloke named Harry Snyder and his wife Esther open a small burger stand. It's nothing fancy. A drive-through window, fresh ingredients, simple menu. No frozen patties, no microwave, just good food made properly. They call it In-Out Burger. And it becomes, over the next 77 years, one of the most beloved fast food chains in American history. The cult following doesn't even cover it. People drive hours for a double-double. Australians visiting California put it on their itinerary like it's Disneyland. The chain stays private, stays family-owned, and becomes as synonymous with California as surfing and sunshine. For 75 years, they never closed a single store, not one. Then came Oakland. In January 2024, In-Out announced they were shutting down their location on Oakport Street in East Oakland. The store had been there for 18 years. It was busy. It was profitable. The COO, Denny Warnick, made the situation very clear in his public statement. He said customers and staff were being regularly victimized by car break-ins, property damage, theft, and armed robberies. He said the location was a good one financially, but, and I'm quoting him directly here, our top priority must be the well-being of our customers and associates. We cannot ask them to visit or work in an unsafe environment. That's corporate speak. For this place has become genuinely dangerous, and we're getting out. Lynsi Snyder, the owner, Harry's granddaughter, worth around $4 billion, later described what it was actually like. There was actually gunshots went through the store. There was a stabbing. There was a lot. For the safety of our associates, we just felt like this is not okay. That's corporate speak for this place has become genuinely dangerous, and we're getting out. Lynsi Snyder, the owner, Harry's granddaughter, worth around $4 billion, later described what it was actually like. There was actually gunshots went through the store. There was a stabbing. There was a lot. For the safety of our associates, we just felt like this is not okay. First closure in 77 years. And it wasn't a struggling store. It was a safe call about an unsafe city. But here's where it gets really interesting, that Oakland closure turned out to be the opening act. Because in July 2025, Snyder sat down for a podcast called Relatable. And what she said next broke the internet. She revealed her family was moving to Franklin, Tennessee, a suburb of Nashville, and that In-Out was building a new office out there. She said, and this is the line that set everything off, there's a lot of great things about California, but raising a family is not easy here. Doing business is not easy here. There was just one small problem. It wasn't entirely true. 3 days later, Snyder put out a clarification. Direct quote, "We're not moving In-Out Burger's corporate headquarters. We're not leaving California or leaving our roots behind. Each one of our locations is here to stay. She's personally moving to Tennessee, and In-Out is opening an Eastern Territory office in Franklin, expected to open in 2026, to support 35 planned new restaurants across the Southeast. But the restaurants in California, still there, new ones even being added. The correction got a fraction of the coverage the original story did. Classic media cycle, the fire gets front page, and the correction gets a paragraph on page 12. But here's the thing, and this is what I really want you to sit with. The correction doesn't make the underlying story less real. If anything, it makes it more interesting. Because even the corrected version is damning. The billionaire owner of a California institution says California is too hard to raise a family in and too hard to do business in. She's choosing to raise her kids somewhere else, and she's building the company's future growth infrastructure somewhere else. California keeps the restaurants, Tennessee gets the CEO's life, her family, her tax residency, and the future. That's not nothing? That's the story. So how did everyone respond? Snyder's original line, "Raising a family is not easy here. Doing business is not easy here," became a political weapon before she'd even finished the podcast. Conservative commentators in America used it as a battering ram against Governor Newsom and California's Democratic leadership. Some went so far as to say Newsom had personally driven her out of the state, which is a stretch, but the sentiment underneath it isn't crazy. Newsom himself didn't respond directly to the In-Out story. No statement, no press release. His office stayed quiet on this one specifically, but his broader posture on the California exodus is that documented. In his State of the State address earlier this year, he pushed back on what he called California derangement syndrome, his term for people who obsess over the state's problems while ignoring its successes. He pointed out that California's GDP grew 5% to reach a record $4.25 trillion in 2025. That's a real number. California's economy, if it were a country, would be the 5th largest on Earth. And look, Newsom's not entirely wrong. California is still an economic powerhouse. The state isn't dying. But here's my honest read. Pointing at the GDP while a 7-year-old beloved institution says, "Your state is too hard to do business in," is a bit like pointing at your bank account while your best mate tells you your house is on fire. Both things can be true simultaneously, and the In-Out story also landed in a context that made it hit harder than it might have otherwise, because it's not just In-Out. Look at the list of who's left California in recent years. Chevron, a California company since 1879, announced it was moving to Houston in 2024. Tesla left for Austin in 2021. Oracle left Silicon Valley for Austin, then moved again to Nashville. Charles Schwab relocated from San Francisco to Dallas. SpaceX, formerly Twitter, Hewlett-Packard. The list goes on. Between 2018 and 2021 alone, over 350 businesses moved their headquarters out of California. According to FDI Markets, a quarter of every corporate headquarters relocation in the entire United States since 2019 came from California, one state. A quarter of all corporate exits nationally. In-Out's CEO choosing Tennessee doesn't stand alone. It stands at the end of a very long line. Here's what most coverage missed, and it's the part that actually matters. The story isn't just about who's leaving. It's about why the math makes leaving so attractive. California has the highest top marginal income tax rate in the United States, 13.3%, and a corporate tax rate of 8.84%. Now compare that to Tennessee. State income tax on wages, 0%. Nothing. The Tax Foundation ranks California 49th out of 50 states in its Business Tax Climate Index. The only state ranked worse is New Jersey. Meanwhile, U-Haul, the moving truck company, publishes data every year on where people are physically moving to and from. California ranked dead last in 2024 for net one-way truck departures, meaning more people are driving U-Hauls out of California than into it. Not by a little, by the most of any state in the country. And they've ranked last 5 years in a row, going back to 2020. The state ran a budget surplus of $97 billion in 2021 to 2022. It's now looking at a deficit of $50 to $70 billion. That's a $150 billion swing in a few years. That's not a blip. That's a structural shift. Now here's the bit I want you to really pay attention to, because this is where the story gets genuinely nuanced. Snyder corrected the in-out is leaving California narrative pretty quickly. The restaurants are staying. But think about what California actually loses even in the corrected version. It loses the CEO's personal tax residency, some portion of corporate tax revenue, as the company builds out its Tennessee infrastructure. The symbolic optics of a beloved California brand publicly saying the state is too hard, and the halo effect, because every time a high-profile name makes any move eastward, it validates the decision for the next 10 people considering the same thing. What California keeps is the restaurants, which are good for employment and sales tax, but the wealth, the decision-making, the future growth, that's going to Tennessee. Tennessee gets Lynsi Snyder's family. Tennessee gets the Eastern HQ. Tennessee gets 35 new restaurants. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee literally had his photo taken with Snyder in Franklin in January 2023 when they announced the hub together. He understood the PR value immediately. And here's my prediction. This pattern isn't slowing down. Each high-profile departure makes the next one easier to justify. Each headline, even the factually shaky ones, plants a seed in the mind of the next executive sitting in a boardroom in San Francisco wondering if the math still works. California's economy is massive and resilient, but the psychology of a place is a real thing, and the psychology of California is shifting. The next domino won't take long, right? Let's bring this home, because I genuinely believe this is one of the most instructive stories for Australians to watch right now. And almost no one here is connecting the dots. Start with a tax comparison. California's top rate is 13.3%. Australia's top federal marginal rate is 45%, kicking in above $180,000. We're not California. We're already past California. The question isn't whether our high earners feel the pinch. The question is what they're doing about it. And increasingly the answer is moving to Dubai, Singapore, or at the very minimum, repositioning their company structures offshore. Then look at the state-level stuff. Victoria has introduced a windfall gains tax, increased land taxes, and pushed harder on property investors than any other state. And what happened? Investment started shifting. Developers started looking at Queensland. High net worth individuals started making noises about Brisbane and the Gold Coast. Sound familiar? The in-out story is the California version of a Melbourne business owner saying it's just not easy to do business here anymore and quietly shifting operations to Queensland. Same sentiment, same pattern, different country. The Oakland closure is also worth sitting with. A profitable retail business shut down, not for commercial reasons, but for safety reasons. If you've spent any time in Melbourne's CBD in the last few years, or talk to small retailers dealing with theft in inner-city Sydney, you know that conversation is already starting here. Not at Oakland levels, but the direction of travel matters. Not just where you are today. For those of you with super, and that's basically all of us, The broader California business climate story affects your investments. Australian super funds hold significant U.S. commercial property through REITs. When office space empties in California as companies relocate, that affects valuations. It's not direct, but it's real. And if you're a business owner or a professional watching this, thinking, is any of this relevant to me? The honest answer is yes. Not because you're about to move to Tennessee, but because the forces driving the story, taxation, regulation, cost of living, public safety, quality of life, those are the same forces that are quietly reshaping where Australian business is done, where Australian wealth accumulates, and where Australian talent chooses to plant itself. We're watching California's story play out in slow motion, and it started decades ago. Here's the takeaway, and it's not what the clickbait headlines told you. In-Out didn't abandon California. The restaurants are still there. More are being added. The correction is real, and it matters. But Lynsi Snyder, fourth-generation family, owner of a 7-year-old California institution worth $4 billion, someone who had every reason to love the state her grandparents built their life in, looked at California in 2025 and said, it's not the right place to raise her kids or grow her business, and she chose Tennessee instead. That's not nothing, that's a signal. And the story doesn't live or die on whether In-Out technically left or not. It lives on what that decision represents. When the people who built a place start quietly choosing somewhere else, you don't need to wait for the official announcement. The vote is already in. The question worth asking isn't, is California dying? It's minus, what does it take before the places we love start losing the people who love them? And does anyone in power actually notice until it's too late? That's the story, not just in California, here too. If this gave you something to think about, the algorithm only shows this kind of content to people who've actually subscribed. So hit subscribe, and I'll keep doing the research so you don't have to. And if you want to see the breakdown of how Australian states are already running their own version of this experiment with business taxes and talent migration, that one's linked in the description. See you in the next one.